My Max Ace Serpent Striker V3 used to look like this, and now it looks like this. But what sorcery is this? What magic could the Brandon clones have conjured? I dyed the G10 myself and installed some accessories from Zippy Balisong. That's it. And it turns out that process is really fun and extremely messy. Kind of like Will and I's video format. We love making our videos, but putting as much effort into them as we do is very creatively taxing. Contrary to what our videos may show you, I actually am a pretty introverted person that just enjoys, my simple evenings hanging out, playing a video game, and listening to a record. And I also really enjoy tinkering with my Balisongs. If you've seen our videos before, you know that my Balisong collection is very driven by customization. Sure, I literally created my own butterfly knife. I've had my Medusa V2 anodized. Will and Machinewise made me my custom Seraph. I have a ton of unique stuff that I am super grateful to be able to own. But I've never truly modded anything before. So today I want to take a page out of Contraption Collection's book, who's making the Balisong scissors that I am so excited for. I flipped them and they're really, really fun. He makes really cool videos where he's been documenting the process of how he's been making the Bali scissors for years now. So I'm gonna pluck his style a little bit and finally make a proper chill video documenting a process that I just find really cool. So without further ado,
Hey guys, it's Brandon Clone number 80,085 here. I thought I'd show you how I customized my Serpent Striker V3.
Sorry. There's been a Brandon clone stuck in my throat for like 3 days. Anyway, so keep in mind, this is not a tutorial. I just want to take you through the process of how I did all this myself and show you all of the mistakes that I made along the way. And maybe that'll inspire you to do something like this. So this journey involved using 2 colors of Rit Dye More to dye the handles, tuning the bushings to get them to fit in the Serpent Striker V3 blade, and installing this 3D printed blade insert and 3D printed spacers from Zippy Balisong. Seems simple enough, right? For somebody that's done this a ton of times, which is not me, it would probably be pretty simple. But here's a secret about me. I am stupid. Stupid enough to accidentally let my dye mixture overboil and wreak havoc on my stovetop, and then spilling the mixture very shortly after. And stupid enough to have to attempt to correctly assemble the Serpent Striker like 6 times. But smart enough to achieve a pretty difficult dye fade on my very first proper attempt. So that felt pretty cool. We made an awesome review of this bad boy, and we think it is absolutely sick. It flips awesome, it's an extremely good value, and it looks really cool. Unfortunately, Max Ace likes to make products in single batches and never make them ever again. Like, actually, Max Ace, can you please make more? I promise people will buy them. If you make more of these and people don't buy them, I will eat mine. That's a guarantee. So finding a white G10 model proved to be pretty difficult, so I had to buy mine secondhand off of somebody on Instagram. It was in great condition, so I just paid the standard $150 price tag for it, which was important because I knew I wanted the G10 to be as pristine as possible. I also had to actually learn the process of even dyeing G10. Thankfully, several YouTube tutorials and members of our private community Patreon Discord, which you can subscribe to for only $3 a month, a wink sound effect, helped me a ton, including even Zippy Balisong himself. Dyeing G10 is pretty straightforward, but it only works in specific ways. In general, you can dye G10 any color that's darker than the actual G10 material itself, but it's very tricky and not very effective to dye G10 that's already dark into a brighter color. For example, you can dye bright pink G10 dark blue, but you couldn't successfully dye dark blue G10 light pink. This is because the G10 is effectively absorbing the dye instead of just painting over it. It really only works in one direction, which I was going to make a joke about, and then I was researching One Direction songs for this video and discovered that What Makes You Beautiful came out almost 12 years ago, and I thought it came out like 6 years ago. So that feels... Anyway, that's why I wanted to start with white, because white G10 you can dye pretty much any color you want. Then I had to actually plan what I even wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to do some kind of fade and use Zippy's accessories because I really like adjustable balance and I hate the sound of the tuning fork blade. Since I knew the color of Zippy's accessories wouldn't completely match the color of the G10 once it was dyed, I opted for a red, purple pattern, so that the plastic and the G10 colors wouldn't be sitting right next to each other. Through all of that, I learned that I needed a white G10 Serpent Striker V3, isopropyl alcohol, distilled white vinegar, multiple rags, rubber gloves, 2 colors of Rit Dye More, a thermometer, something to hold the G10 scales on, a stovetop, 2 boiling pots, and 2 cans of corn, or any food can really. Note that you can use regular Rit Dye instead of Rit Dye More, but odds are that the colors aren't going to be nearly as vibrant if you just use standard Rit Dye. And once I had all that, I got down to business. To defeat the Huns. First was taking apart the Serpent Striker, which is a pretty simple process, but there are a lot of parts to keep track of. And that's why I was extremely grateful to have been sent the Bally Spindle from Bark Handle on Instagram. He partnered with Zippy to make this little guy, and it makes taking apart Balisongs way more simple and organized. This, of course, isn't sponsored or anything, but they did send it for free, and it honestly made this whole process way easier than it would have been without it. It uses toothpicks to keep the actual handles organized, and then this little tray to keep all the smaller parts, with labels for both the bite and safe handle. He even customized ours with a Hirsch logo. Thank you very much, Bark Handle. This is honestly really cool. And despite the aim of this video being chill, I am now going to use the actual rock song that Bark Handle made specifically for Will and I to use in our videos. So I took everything apart, set my scales aside, and then wiped them down very well with a rag and isopropyl alcohol. Skin oils and dirt of any kind can mess with the dyeing process, so I made sure that they were extra clean. Then I made the actual dye mixture. After reading a ton about G10 dyeing, I found that doing about 8 parts water and 2 parts dye worked best for me. With my mixture, this ended up being about 2 cups of water and half a cup of dye. Zippy recommended that I throw in a shot of white distilled vinegar, which helps the G10 absorb the dye apparently, and it made a huge difference. Once I had that, it was boiling time. I initially thought that I would be able to get away with using just the pots themselves, which would be fine if I was dyeing the whole scale one color, but since I needed to do one side and color at a time, I needed a taller boiling solution. So I grabbed my cans of Akbar and made some incredibly stupid decisions. I decided I should pre-boil the mixture before transferring it into smaller cans, which just didn't make sense. This led to my mixture boiling over and then me completely screwing up the transfer process, which is not great because this stuff will stain pretty much anything. So I resorted to just scooping a little bit at a time until it was mostly full. Then, unlike James Bond, who has no time to die, it was Brandon's time to die. I did practice on a spare Nautilus scale that I had laying in a Brandon clone, and I was pretty satisfied with the color and the fade that I did. I decided to do 2 scales at a time, which did run the risk of getting an uneven fade, but with the cans that I had and the janky setup that I did, screwing up 2 seemed better than screwing up 4. I chose to do the red side first since I knew I would be fading it with purple, and dyeing a darker purple over a lighter red is a lot easier than dyeing a lighter red over a darker purple. I used a little coat hanger to attach the scales to and a plastic tip at the end to make sure the scales didn't fall off. This is not a professional setup in any way, but it did get the job done. The boiling temperature is very important here. The mixture needs to be at least 180 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit to get the right color. It doesn't take long for the dye to do its work. For the red portion, it didn't sit in the dye for more than maybe a minute. I had roughly measured out where the exact middle of the scale was, and I aimed to go slightly more than I needed to in the name of getting an even fade. After dipping all 4 scales into the red dye mixture, I got a color that I was super happy with. Then it was time to repeat the process for the purple side. I had to be much more deliberate and delicate here, since if I went too far with the purple dye, there wasn't a solid way I was going to be able to undo it. The purple dye needed a bit more time in the mixture to get the color that I wanted, which was actually good since I wanted to make sure that the fade was as even as I could possibly get. Thankfully, it turned out incredibly good. All 4 of the scales except for 1 have a nearly perfectly matched fade, with 1 just being very, very slightly off. But I am extremely happy with the result. By far the least entertaining part of the process was tuning the bushings. Bushings have to be an extremely specific size in order to function properly. And as my machinist friends would say, metalworking is all about them thous, baby. or thousandths of an inch. I used a relatively cheap pair of calipers that measured at hundredths of a millimeter, measured the thickness of the blade, and tried my best to sand the bushings with 2000 grit sandpaper to get the sizes to match. I made the bushings about 0.03 millimeters thicker than the blade, which has worked well for me in the past. Then it was time to Avengers reassemble the Balisong. My comedy is on fire today. Pretty much every Balisong is built slightly different, but the Serpent Striker in particular has a lot of parts. It has various parts that need to be oriented in specific ways to go back together, especially because of the pivot barrel design, which can only go in one way and in one direction, because that's what makes you beautiful. 12 years ago! This is why I had to attempt to reassemble it like 6 times, but I did get there. Again, the Bali spindle was a huge help here. I wouldn't say you need something like this for, say, a channel design washer Balisong with only 2 screws, but for something with this many parts, it was extremely useful. Once I had it mostly put back together, it was time to install the Zippy mods. Installing his spacers is a bit tricky and takes a good bit of force, but overall it's pretty simple. Zippy has a dedicated video on how to do this, so I'll spare the details. The coolest thing about these is that they add jimping and have a slot for a little tungsten weight to make the handle weight adjustable. Inserting the blade insert is extremely simple. You just use a good bit of force to press it into the trainer blade, then push in the tungsten weights. I found that 3 weights out of 5 is best for my preference because I prefer a slight handle bias. But with that, yeah, I was done. It's been a few weeks now since I did the mod, and it's held up really well, but has had a few weird issues. It's had kind of inexplicable blade rub on one side, which has been really annoying, but I did replace the washers, and that appears to have mostly fixed it. But I got a pretty solid tune on it. Oh, focus please. I got a pretty solid tune on it though. It's pretty nice. Overall, this process was a ton of fun, and I love how it flips. And what I really love is that these aren't just cosmetic upgrades. Zippy is essentially leading the charge in terms of customizability and adjustability for Balisongs, and not having to be stuck with a, quote, stock balance is really entertaining. The balance points you can get with this mod range from a neutral bias to a strong handle bias with tons of granularity in between, and it's been really fun to experiment with. Also, here's a quick sound test for the trainer blade with and without the Zippy insert. Doing all this makes me appreciate the process of modding Balisong so much more, and doing these mods wasn't even anything crazy compared to what other people have done. Especially when you look at people like Solar Flare, one of our Patreon supporters, who has more custom BRS replicants than I do Brandon clones. And there's enough Brandon clones to start a third world small island nation with a pretty solid GDP. Speaking of Solar Flare, he does titanium anodizing, which I want to do for this because it does have titanium liners. I was going to include that process in this video, but that takes a really long time to explain, and it's actually a really cool process, so I'm going to save that for a future video. And honestly, I would really appreciate if you let me know in the comments what you think about this more chill kind of video. This is new for me, and I'm still kind of feeling it out, but if you want more of these, let me know. Do the subscribe-y, like-y, bell stuff. I kind of like it. As I'm filming it, like, this is cool. It's honestly kind of nice not having to have clones of me pop up in the doorway every 5 seconds. I'm not gonna do it. No, there's nothing. See, if I do this, it's gonna be really hard now for me to composite clones into this. So no, it's not gonna happen. I'm so sorry. And of course, a huge thank you to our Patreon supporters. In the wake of Will and I's recent YouTube financial woes, which are very much keeping us from pursuing doing YouTube full time, every single cent of support means a ton to us, whether that's Patreon or that's merch, or even just watching the videos. Thank you. But on Patreon, if you want to join awesome people like Agi and Jhed44, click the link in the description, because you can support us for only $3 little a month. And now it's time for what is the hardest part of this video for me, which is just ending it in a chill way where nothing weird or crazy happens, like a Brandon clone appears out of nothingness and he's holding a sword and looks like really angry at me and he's approaching me, but then he stops and he looks off into space and realizes, oh my gosh, our existence is just so finite, and how are we going to make life worth living with the very limited amount of time that we have? And this hits him so hard that he drops the sword and he looks off frame and he walks out of it, and then the video just suddenly cuts to black.